Welcome to the Death Talk podcast. The vision for this podcast is to break the culture of silence surrounding death and dying. I'm your host, Lisa Murray. Okay, so today's guest is writing a book, and I want to know how do I pronounce your last name?
Oh, it's Buist.
Buist. Okay, I wouldn't have known that you.
It anyway.
Okay. Well, you're a pretty reliable source. You've had that name for a while.
I think that, but I've met several people with my last name, and none of us agree on how it's pronounced. So.
Really? That's funny.
Yeah. I go with Buist. So
okay, so I welcome you, Erica Buist, and well, first of all, just welcome to the Death Talk podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Okay, so what I like to do on this podcast is start with the incident, and then I'll let you talk, and then we'll go back in and I'll ask questions and we'll open it up from there. Does that sound good?
Sure. The incident being the thing that made me
the catalyst. Yes. The death experience that launched everything for you with this whole thing. So take it away, Erica.
It was a Tuesday in October 2014. And my then fiance, now husband, and I we had literally just moved out of his father's house, like a few months before this incident. So we'd been living with him for 2 years during the job crisis. He studied and I was sort of muddling through the lowest ranks in journalism. And we finally managed to move out and get our own place. And my husband gets a call from his father's cleaner, who turned up to the house and said that, he wasn't answering the door. There was milk and newspapers on the doorstep. The dog was barking. And he went into denial immediately. Like I straight away was 100% sure he was dead. But he was just like, he's probably just gone out and forgotten to tell anyone. So for about a week, we'd sort of been emailing him and wondering why he hadn't responded. So he had actually been dead for 8 days. Which is quite it was a bad Tuesday, let's put it that way. Basically my father-in-law had dropped dead. And it's a very strange thing to be the grieving in-law because nobody thinks you're sad. We've got this thing where the traditional family is falling by the wayside, but for some reason, when it comes to grief, we all revert back to traditional ideas. People thought I hadn't really lost anybody, so that was sort of the beginning catalyst. But then it sort of morphed because it was my reaction. I think because first of all, the fact that sort of no one asked how I was, everyone asked how is Dion, which I totally get. But it sort of occurred to me, and bear in mind, I thought I was a genius for noticing this. It occurred to me that anyone I'm not looking at might be dead. And I decided that I needed to do something about this and check on everybody. And it is ridiculous. I wrote an essay about it that I'm happy people found hilarious, but they are laughing at me because it's all true. I was sitting there sort of going, well, I suppose it falls to me to check on everybody then. So I was just sort of constantly stalking everybody I knew online to check that they were still alive. I had an amazing process, I think it was a 6-step process to work out.
What's that? What was the system?
Okay, let me think of it now. It's been a while. First of all, it was literally going to whichever social media platform they frequent most often and seeing if they've posted in the last, few hours or in the last couple of days. And if they hadn't, I would message them. And what I was really looking for was the ticks. The tick to say it's been received, the 2 ticks to say that it's received in the device, and then the blue, when it turns blue, to show that they've read it. I was not interested at all in their response. I just wanted to see that they've read it.
Right.
But then, of course, it occurred to me, if you send somebody a WhatsApp message, what if they're lying dead next to their phone and it just happens to be open on the messages? I'm an idiot. Look at me just assuming they're alive. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to message them again tomorrow because if they're dead, their battery will have gone flat. Like, these are genuinely...
I feel so bad because of what that's so heartbreaking because, that's a trauma. That's an extreme trauma to find out about your father-in-law. And that's just... It's like you trying to, that just breaks my heart. And I don't know. I just feel really bad.
Don't worry. The thing is, it's always a death reminder when someone you love dies.
Right, right.
But we kind of got a sort of a double hit of it because he'd been dead for 8 days. So we had to deal with the realities of what happens to a body after 8 days. And it's a lot. You know, they don't look the same. You have to deal with the smell and all of this stuff that's it's very crass, and it's very, I don't know, it's basically, it's kind of like if you turn the saturation up on a photo too much, it gets hideous. It was like that. And you know, I think it's difficult when you have, I'm kind of an anxious person anyway, to be honest. But what, you know, when you become over-informed and you apply what feels like completely rational logic to your, frankly, insanity, I ended up thinking, I genuinely thought everyone was an idiot. And I was like, how have you not worked this out, Eva? And of course, everyone's worked it out. They're just busy getting on with their lives. And, you know, eventually I sort of realized that, I don't know, I thought, this isn't what I'm doing. I'm not being a friend right now. I'm like a head counter. That's the only way I'm maintaining my relationships right now, is I'm just doing a constant head count. So one day, I start, you know, that moment when you start to see yourself through someone else's eyes and start to realize, oh, am I wrong? So I had this when my husband texted me. He was very excited for someone called Claude Littner, who's a reality star, and he was going to be on the Apprentice, our version of The Apprentice, which I hate, and he makes me watch because he thinks it's funny when I hate things. So he told me that Claude Littner is going to be on The Apprentice, and my genuine first response, I texted back and said, oh, that's great, because he would have had to do a medical, so even though he's overweight, he's probably not about to drop dead of heart disease.
Oh, wow.
Like now, when I look at this, I can fully hear the logic that my brain went through, but the fact that I just said that to another human being out loud, as if it was an ordinary thing to say.
Right.
So ridiculous. And he sort of paused, as you would. And I was just staring at the phone going, why isn't he texting back? Oh my God, has he been in an accident? Oh my God, terrorist attack. And then I saw the little 3 dots come up and I was like, oh, phew. And then he sends me a text that says, hun, that's a really weird response. And again, first of all, I was like, whatever. I'm just thinking ahead, unlike all of you idiots. And then I'm Googling, does heart disease show up during a medical? And then I suddenly sort of stop myself and go, what am I doing? Why am I Googling the possible heart health of a reality show star who I don't like? I don't know. And I sort of went, oh, this isn't normal. This moment of realization. But, you know, even at that point, all I'm sort of realizing is that this isn't normal. And I'm realizing that I haven't been outside. And I realized that I've developed agoraphobia. Like, oh damn it. Oh, come on. Like, and it was, and again, so I just Googled how to get over agoraphobia. And I was genuinely hoping it would be like, you need some vitamin C, so have some orange juice. And it didn't say that. It was the rudest possible response. You just have to go outside, which is literally the rudest answer you could possibly give. Right. Agoraphobic, like, oh, you've got the flu? Yeah, go for a jog in the snow. Like, oh, come on. So this, I live in a really nice area of North London. It's a beautiful little sort of villagey place. So it's ridiculous that when I did manage to get outside, I was just terrified of everybody. Like, they were basically what we call yummy mummies, and they were going to Zumba, and I was sort of running into the road to avoid them. And, you know, the air was just thick like melted chocolate. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go buy a sandwich. This was the only goal. And, you know, when I managed to pick up the sandwich in the supermarket, it was so stressful. Someone approached me, and all she was saying was like, she was trying to give me a discount on some cookies or something. And I just lost it, and I just chucked the sandwich down. I just threw it down, and I just ran home. And I was sort of sitting there thinking, okay, I'm probably not dealing with this very well, am I? And it was literally only at that moment that Mexico's Day of the Dead popped into my head. Because I used to live in Mexico. I lived there for 2 years. And I remember literally thinking the words that all my Mexican friends, when they think about death, when they face death, they throw a party. And I just threw a sandwich. So I sort of thought, wow, I've really taken a wrong turn somewhere. So purely out of interest, I Googled death festivals around the world, wondering if there were any more. And there were loads of them, just loads and loads of them. And I think I spent about 2 hours researching all these different death festivals. And by the end of it, I'd made a list of places where they celebrate death or the dead, where it's an overtly joyful thing, where it's about acceptance or support or even just having a continued relationship with the dead, all of this stuff that I was obviously not doing. And then my husband came home and I had to tell him I failed to go to a shop 900 feet away, but I'm also going to visit 7 death festivals all over the world, and this makes sense somehow. And he was sort of baffled, and you know, he eventually asked why 7. And apart from the fact that 7 is, you know, it's quite a significant number in religion all over the world, I just sort of said we found him on the 8th day. So it's 1 for every day we didn't find him.
Oh, wow.
And that's when it all started. And I had to get myself to the point where I could go to the shop, which I nailed. And yeah, I've done it now. I've been to all 7 of the death festivals, and I've written the book, and it's currently in the editing stages, and it's coming out in February, and it's called This Party's Dead. And it's I would like it on the record, this is a totally normal reaction to finding a loved one dead, just so you know.
Right. Wow, that's a lot. You know, what you really speak to for me is you know, we all have different ways of dealing with grief, but I don't hear enough about people who deal with trauma too, that's connected to the grief, because yes, I mean, all of it's under the same umbrella. But when the first one that kicked off this thing for me, well, there was another one before this, but was my friend who was run over by a train. And I talked to him on Tuesday. He said he was going to get a new phone. He would contact me when he got a new phone. And by Friday, I started thinking, where is he? And same with Saturday. I was like, what's going on? And then anyway, so I got a message actually on Monday morning that he was run over by a train. And on Saturday during the day. And it was weird because I had all these weird bodily reactions. Like during the day, I felt really achy. I felt weird. And I didn't know what was going on, but it was right around the time when he would have been run over. Wow. And it was the trauma of finding out someone that you totally love and care about and know more than you know any other person on earth went through something like that, like violent or just even a death alone. I think like that's another part. I was talking with another guest. We were talking about that there's different types of ways that the grief and the trauma would hit you, right? So there's like a grid of like, was this a person at work, or is this your best friend? What's the status of your relationship? Did you just have a falling out? Or, you know, so there's so many different things about how it affects. I mean, grief is grief, but then if you go inside of that, there's other aspects to it. So the fact that it was your father-in-law, which, yeah, I mean, of course, you lived there and you know him. And so why wouldn't you have an intense reaction? And also, you guys were the ones trying to figure out where he was. It wasn't like you heard about it somewhere, you know? So all of that, and then just your reaction to it, you kind of, I don't know if people understand this, and I've been trying to say this since August 12th, 2014 is when I lost Derek, or 2012, sorry. I always do that. I merge my brother's death year. But we kind of go a little bit insane, I think, like quote unquote. I don't feel like I was really normal at that time either. Like, I don't know what's right or normal or whatever, but we live in a society where you can't even talk about it anyways. Nobody wants to talk about it. So what's normal then? It's not fair.
Well, yeah, we don't really get, I mean, for everything else, if you have something, if you have some kind of illness or whatever, most of the time, a doctor or a professional or even just a person who lives in the world can tell you what sort of thing you're going to expect. You know, if you have even just a cold, everyone knows, okay, you might have a sore throat, you might have a blocked nose, cough, etc. And and, you know, these things are well known. But when it comes to grief, because it's something that makes people uncomfortable and want to change the subject, largely because they can't help, I think. They can't fix it.
Right.
And so they just try to change the subject. I think that's one of the reasons that we're kind of, you know, we're not all familiar with the symptoms of grief. Like you say, some of them are physical, and how it can, you know, it can trigger other things like anxieties. I mean, I was astonished to find out that agoraphobia is not an illness. It's a symptom of anxiety. I was like, of this.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, this is what I was told when my husband forced me to go to therapy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is a symptom. I was like, this is a symptom. This all-encompassing thing is a symptom. I'm done. I can't believe this. But, you know, it's, I mean, that's like the sort of thing that can happen when you suppress it. But absolutely, the symptoms of grief are so little known and little talked about. And I think lately, I feel like a lot of people have been talking about it lately, but I think that's because I'm in this little death positive bubble where, because of the research that I've been doing and the people I've been talking about, of course, they're talking about it all the time, but I do get the feeling we're kind of preaching to the home crowd, you know, where it's really hard. And I mean, my parents are medics, and they are very much the stereotypical, let's not talk about it, death is a failure in our industry kind of medics. And I'm not kidding, it took them 2 years to muster up the courage to ask me how my book is going. And I'm pretty sure that's because my sister told them off. And even then, I could see, when I was answering, I could see they were just desperate for me to stop talking. Just please, just change the subject. It really, I mean, honestly, I think that being the daughter of medics and writing a book about death qualifies me as a huge disappointment, but whatever, you know, I didn't rebel as a teenager, so they can deal.
That's like my mom. She has show dogs. She shows dogs, and I rescue like pit bulls and mixes from shelters. So I feel like we're in the similar.
That's so rebellious.
Well, I just saw the need. I'm like, okay, so everybody wants show dogs, but what's up when I was a little kid? And I'm like, what's up with those other dogs? Like, why, you know, anyway, so you see the need. And also it was serving something for you as well. And with the death positive movement, it is almost like once you start to go into that world, it's like when you get a red car and you start noticing red cars everywhere. I don't know if I'm just noticing it more or if there really is a movement, but it feels like there's a movement, and there's more lively discussion and action in my Death Talk podcast Instagram account than any of my other accounts. I'm like, I can post anything and people are just like, yeah, whatever. And I post a quote in the Death Talk podcast and I get a bunch of discussion. So I'm like, there's something going on here.
Bunch, definitely. But, you know, actually one of the chapters in my book, I actually tracked that there are 3 really significant death movements that are absolutely mushrooming in the West right now. One of them is death positive. Another one is the Santa Muerte, you know, like the Saint of Death. You've probably seen in that sort of began in Mexico.
Yeah.
And another one is an anti-death movement called transhumanism, which the people who follow that think that they are, that, you know, their hope essentially is that technology will get them to the point where they can upgrade, be more than human, and never have to die. And the really fascinating thing about these 3 movements is how astonishingly uniform the demographics of the followers are. So Santa Muerte is mostly working class people. It's mostly people who have a much higher chance of an unnatural death, like being murdered. So it's a lot of working class people, a lot of people in Mexico who have, you know, more likely to die because of the narco activity. A lot of trans women have actually joined as well, because they get murdered at a much higher rate than other people. And then you've got transhumanism, the anti-death movement, which is mostly white men. It's mostly, and that's probably because, you know, people who have generally better lives, they have most of their needs met. You know, these are people who are not being shot in the street like you might be in certain parts of Mexico. They're not having their safety threatened. They have enough food. They have shelter. Really, the only bad thing is that this sweet deal has an expiry date. So essentially it's a movement of privilege, is that, you know, deaths, the fact that you're going to die one day becomes the biggest problem. Whereas, you know, in, you know, if you drive if you drive south to Mexico from where this movement mainly is, which is largely in California, if you drive south, you've got people that just want to make it to old age. And then you're up there in Silicon Valley, where the fact of getting old is an affront to these people. And they think, well, I shouldn't have to die if I don't want to. And then you've got death positive, which is mostly white women, overwhelmingly white women.
That's funny.
Yeah. So again, I mean, this is, and I think
I feel so exposed. I'm like sitting here as a white woman going, oh my God, I'm part of that one.
You know how many times I've given a talk and I've gone, mostly white women. Let's see. And I just sort of look at it and I'm like, yep, there's like 3 of you who don't meet that description. And again, you've got this thing where, you know how there's this sort of, this movement in feminism where they tell you to, you know, accept your curves. And this is supposed to be, a feminist act is to accept your body's curves. Well, how much more of a radical act is it to accept your body's eventual decay? Because the fact is that we live in a society where you are valued as a woman, you are valued on your youth, on your beauty, and on your ability to bear children. And once those things don't matter anymore, you kind of lose value. And, you know, death care used to be women's work, and really it only became men's work when it became professionalized, when men thought they could make money out of it. So women kind of get cut out of that. So it is this, but the question is, why aren't people of color joining? Why is it mainly white women? And, you know, I've asked a lot of people about that. And again, the general consensus seems to be, you're going to be more concerned about, you know, what the concerns of your community are. So again, it's sort of a luxury to get to sit around and talk about accepting your death. You know, you're not going to be doing that if you're a bit more threatened. So, but it's a fascinating time for death movements and stuff, because I think it's really reflecting people's, people's specific anxieties about it. But not all of the movements are geared towards acceptance at all.
Wow, I've never heard of the third one, but it totally, actually, now that I think about it, like science and trying to stay young, or people who, what is it? They have their heads cut off, and then what is that where they freeze their heads?
Yeah, I know a guy who's gonna do. Actually, I know a guy and I know a woman as well who's going to be doing that. So they give their head to Alcor and they put it in deep freeze. And the idea, I mean, don't get me wrong, 100% of people who are stored in those freezers are dead. They are 100% dead. The idea is that hopefully in the future they will get to the point where they're able to revive them. Now, I stumbled on that word because when I first was talking to someone about it, I used the word defrost. Not cool, apparently. Not supposed to say defrost. So I was politely corrected.
Defrost is frowned upon. Yeah, exactly.
It's revive, thank you. But yeah, I didn't want to make him sound like a chicken in deep freeze, but I did.
Right.
So.
I feel like my partner is from Nigeria. And so there's like a whole different, other countries. And I do want to get more into that in this podcast, like different cultures and how they view death. So mostly what we're talking about is Western, right? Like Western culture, America, UK.
Absolutely.
And I feel like, pardon me?
I mean, that's essentially when we're talking about fear of death, like and denial of death. That is a uniquely very, very Western tradition.
Right. And I also feel like it's religion too, like such as like with a lot of like Black people in America, it's very, and I don't know, this is what I want to seek out. I want to find other cultures, but from my perspective, I grew up Catholic, but I always was very spiritual. And I go to a Unity church. I don't go all the time, but I go when I go and I love it. And Maya Angelou went to a Unity church. So it's much more, do you know anything about Unity church? Like how it's multi-denominational, like Buddhism?
No.
It's nice because it's sort of like, it's like an Instagram feed because it's like everything positive, like with only positive stuff though. But it is based on Christianity, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like the best parts of Christianity and then Buddhism and other, just anything that can be woven together from any of the master teachers. And so it's really nice.
What's really fascinating about that is that if you look at all religions, if you think of religion in terms of perks, every religion has perks, right? So, for example, Christianity is Jesus picks up the tab for your sins. In Buddhism, you'll be reincarnated, you get to come back, whatever. You can if you look at it in terms of perks. There's one perk that 100% of religions that I've seen have in common, which is that you don't have to die.
Right.
you will that the question of death is taken care of, and the answer does not ever seem to be death. Oh yeah, you're done. It's always, oh no, you won't die because, and it's, you'll go to another place, you'll be reincarnated, whatever. But so that's really fascinating that that a unity church is one where sort of like a kind of amalgamation of all the religions, because you can do that when you've got this one particular perk in mind, which, to be honest, is probably the reason a lot of people turn to religion in the first place. Is it's a way to deal with the terror of death. And I think that one of the other fascinating things about that is that you can track. There's a graph that you can plot, which is how much the state helps people out in their country and the belief in God. So in a lot of African countries, belief in God is almost at 100%. There's almost no atheism at all. And of course, they don't have a lot of help from the state. In a place like Denmark, where the state is so involved that, you know, they'll give you a hug if you need one. Okay, not that much, but there's very, very an awful lot of good stuff. You know, free healthcare, free education, all of this stuff. Atheism is very, very high. And, you know, even and actually, the US has a percentage of belief in God that is actually on par with a lot of African countries. And it is this country, and this hyper-developed country, of course, but the amount of help that's given the citizens is pretty low, actually. Like, people don't have free healthcare, people don't have a lot of social security, and you know, that's going to cause a lot of. You got to understand, as a Brit, where we have this whole thing about free healthcare, it is absolutely mind-boggling for us to look across and see people have to pay that to have their, you know, their health hinge on their wealth in this way. That is just so frightening to us, that thought. So I'm kind of not surprised that there's this much higher belief in God in a place where, you know, if you don't, you basically, you look for the thing that's going to make you survive, and then you believe in it. And you know, in a place where that help isn't there, that safety net isn't there, it's going to be either God or money. And funnily enough, the American dollar does have a symbol of immortality on it, which is kind of crazy on the nose. Like,
what's the symbol? I'm trying to remember what it would be.
It's that pyramid with the eye at the top.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, a symbol of immortality. And you think, all right, guys, that's a little on the nose. Good. Literally putting it on the dollar.
Well, the one thing that really helped me, because I don't know, religion always, growing up, even when my family, my grandparents especially, were very religious. My uncle was a deacon of the Catholic Church, and we went to church all the time. And well, I didn't actually; they did. But my parents divorced, so there was a whole bunch of stuff going on, you know, for Catholicism, and you know, it was like a bad thing then. But I remember looking at people thinking it's interesting that they all have to come here and do this to be connected to some feeling of more. And also, I believe in kindness and like just being good to people and nature, and like looking to nature for answers for things. You know, I feel like all the answers we need are in life. They're already here. And so I have this whole other thing. And then remember being a little kid looking around thinking religion is so, you know, I don't know, but I still got something out of it, and I still enjoyed what I learned from it and everything. I don't have any negative, you know, I wasn't beaten by a nun or anything. I don't have anything bad. But one thing that really helped me, because I went through this whole period of time where I was fearing death when I was about 18, early 20s, I was terrified of death, like terrified. No religion helped me at all. I wasn't even really looking to religion too, because I just don't want someone to tell me, oh, well, just believe in God. Like, that's not enough for me, especially when I was afraid. So one thing that really helped me was researching near-death experiences. People from all different backgrounds and all different belief systems die, and then they buy in front of a doctor. I mean, I've been interested to know if your parents ever had this happen with them. And then they come back and they tell the doctors, they tell the staff all this stuff about what happened and what they saw. That to me is the closest thing for me to go, there has to be more. There's got to be something going on here. So what are your thoughts about near-death experiences?
Well, I think it's interesting that that's what you were going for, is that you need, essentially, I think a lot of what we fear, and when I speak to people in some of the other cultures that I visited, when they talk about the fear of death, it's actually quite different to the fear of death that I'm talking about, that we have here in the West, you know. I'll give you an example. I had basically the exact same conversation twice, once in Mexico and once in Bali, where I said, oh yeah, we're really afraid of death where I'm from. And they said, well, everyone's afraid of death, obviously. We're all people. And I said, yeah, so what are you worried about? And they said, well, I'm worried about my family. Like, how would my wife and kids survive without me? And I said, well, forget that. Just imagine, forget that. Imagine they'll be fine. Are you still afraid? And they're like, well, I don't want to die in a horrible way. And I said, okay, fine, done. Let's say I can make it so that you just go to sleep one day and you never wake up, and I can promise you that your family will be fine. Are you still afraid? And they looked at me like, no. And I said, well, we're afraid of that. We're afraid of nothingness. We're afraid of not existing. Is that dumb? And they just looked at me and went, yeah, that's dumb. It's amazing how the conversation was just the same. Like I said, we would still be afraid. Are you not afraid? And the way they sort of looked at me like, I don't want to be rude to you, but what are you talking about? And it's, and so I think that in itself is quite interesting, that the way the fear of death takes on a different form. I mean, of course, everyone is afraid of death. It was during the Vietnam War that they enjoyed putting out this propaganda saying, when monks were immolating themselves in protest, like the one Thich Quang Duc in Vietnam, setting himself on fire, and they sort of tried to take away from that by saying, oh, Asians don't mind dying as much as us. It's not true, but the form that it takes is fascinatingly different. So with near-death experiences, what's really interesting about the fact that gave you comfort is it shows that it was that thing that worried you, the idea that you just disappear and are nothing. And it's interesting that we have such difficulty with that concept. And it might come from, the kind of secularism that we live under. I mean, particularly in Britain, we're much less enchanted here than over in the States, where religion's much higher. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, I've read a little bit about near-death experiences and people sort of experiencing things after. And, there are scientific explanations for some of it, like the light at the end of the tunnel. That's how the brain shuts down. I was reading that's what happens to the vision. But it's also, I don't know, it's fascinating to hear about, but it doesn't particularly comfort me. Partly because I'm not sure what I'm looking for anymore. I think I'm no longer looking for confirmation that death is a whole bunch of nothingness. And I also don't, I got into a conversation with a woman in New Orleans who said, I just don't know how do you atheists proceed with your day? Like, how is there any meaning to life? And I was like, what are you talking about? Are you like, if I'm not going to have dessert, that means this steak sucks? What are you talking? This is all I have. How does your life mean anything? If you think, I'll have another one later. I'm like, no. This is everything. I've got to make the most out of this. I have to chew all the flavor out of this while it's here, because I don't understand, genuinely, I don't understand how religious people's lives can have as much meaning as an atheist, to be honest. If I'm going to have a hot take, that's it. but yeah, I love the stories of near-death experiences. I think they're fascinating, but I definitely don't think I'm drawing any comfort from them.
Well, I think listening to you is just reaffirming to me why it's so important to have this podcast and to have all these different discussions, because there are so many different viewpoints. And even the fear of death, I hadn't really thought about it, but you're right. That could be even broken into different things. Fear of the pain, or fear of leaving people behind, or fear of going into the unknown. But for me, what I really mostly, and I was thinking as you were talking, I'm like, what did I really get from when I first heard about near-death experiences? And I think the biggest thing that really struck a chord in me was when people would talk about that there was a life review, and that there was some type of consciousness, and that the person had chosen this lifetime. That's where my consciousness went, right or wrong, whatever. That's where I resonated with. I was like, it wasn't so much that there's something else. It was more, why am I here? And to know that I may be like here as in a classroom type, if this is a dimension that we're here just to learn in the physical world or something, and there's something here that a whole bunch of things that I'm meant to learn, that I can, and that love is the most important thing. That's the other thing I got out of it, that love is the most important thing. To give love, to be loving, like to be kind, to be all that kind of stuff. That's always been important to me from the time I was a little kid. So to hear that, I guess, kind of was like, yeah, okay. I mean, it's better than hating everybody. And that's what a lot of
Yeah.
religions, I feel like they do. They get the whole, that's why I'm repelled by a lot of religion, because I'm like, you guys, you're not even doing what you're saying. It's just like crazy to me.
Yeah, I think people just have. I mean, I think hate, just from what a lot of research I've done, hate is actually is a reaction to fear of death. It's there's a very good book called The Worm at the Core: The Role of Death in Life, which talks about how people, once they've had a death reminder, they're much more likely afterwards to be racist. They're more likely to be violent against women and excuse people who are violent against women. They are more likely to kind of separate people into out groups. They're more likely to ridicule immigrants. It's this strange thing where people want to sort of reinforce that they're special. I think what you're describing with like love is the most important thing. It kind of, there's this need to sort of elevate us above other types of creatures. I mean, even something as simple as ghosts, right? If someone fumigates their house of cockroaches, they do not then think they're hearing ghost cockroaches in the walls. Like, it just doesn't happen. But if a person is murdered, oh, that is so important that this violent act has imprinted the air and we have a ghost now. You know, even something like that, we need to sort of lend ourselves a kind of supremacy. These sort of this idea that we live on, and that our feelings and our projects matter. They matter in the universe, like independently of us. This is something that we have a huge need to kind of believe. And so,
well, I do believe that everything is energy, and that energy can't be destroyed, right? It just is transferring to different things. So,
I mean, that's scientifically sound. Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe that. And that's kind of what grounds this for me. But then the nature of belief is just, it's a belief, it's a feeling, and it's not something you can prove to anyone else.
Right.
Unless they go through their own thing, or, and I'm just guessing too. I always say, all I know is this is what I think, and I believe it, and I live my life like this, but we don't know, and we won't know until whenever. We either will never know, or we'll know at some point. So,
and what you have with religions hating each other or other people is that it's not enough for a lot of people to say, this is what I believe. They actually have to go further and go, no, safety in numbers. If you believe it too, then I'm more likely to be right. And if you don't believe it, then maybe I'm wrong. And maybe this is all chaos. And maybe when I die, it won't matter. And I can't handle that. So, this is kind of the way it spirals out of control for people. So you get entire religions based on, Christianity is all about safety in numbers, people going and trying to convert everybody. It feels like it's more real if more people believe it, I think, which is, and I get it. And, I'm saying this and I'm thinking this. It doesn't mean that when someone tries to convert me, which happens a lot for some reason, I don't ridicule those people. I get it. We all have to get through the day. And I'm certainly not going to ridicule someone for wanting to convert me when, if I knew them a bit better, I probably would have stalked them online a couple of years ago to check they were alive. We all have our ways of coping with what is essentially terror. I think that was one of the things that prompted me to want to go and visit different festivals for the dead, was because there are so many negative ways that this fear and this terror impacts our behavior. In my case, it was agoraphobia. In other cases, it's hateful conduct. So I thought I'd like to go somewhere where people are consciously reacting with joy, and I absolutely found it. It was 7 different countries on, I think, 4 different continents, and I've seen some astonishing things now, and I am forever changed. Even though what I wanted to do, I want to point out now, I was not trying to do Eat, Pray, Love with corpses, but this was not like, oh, this is how I became okay with death. I did. That was a side effect. But I'd hate for anyone to think that you get over grief by visiting 7 different countries. That would be a very expensive way to do it. But it's more that I just became obsessed with this idea of how people deal with their death anxiety in a way that's better than mine. And it was an endlessly fascinating journey.
And what 7 countries did you go to?
So I started in Mexico because I used to live there, so I figured it was a good one to start with. Then Nepal was the next one. Then Sicily, which is the only death festival I found in Europe. Then Thailand, Japan, Madagascar, and Indonesia. And those last two involved actual corpses. So you can see why I left them to the end. I probably better.
Oh, wow.
Prepare myself for that. So yeah, I did that over several years.
Which one had the biggest impact on you?
You know, it's hard to say because they a lot of them had an impact in different ways. So, you know, for example, I was still very raw when I went to Mexico, and you know, but by the end of that, I sort of found myself putting something in my calendar, which I hadn't done for a year. You know, and because calendars just beep and hurt your feelings. Because after a week after Chris died, my calendar chirped birthday dinner with Chris, and I was like, oh, calendars just hurt your feelings. Well, I won't be doing that again. And then, you know, just later after this death festival, even though it had been kind of disastrous, I found myself putting something in my calendar, and I thought, oh wow, where did that come from? Maybe giving myself time and space to grieve and talk to Chris, even though I know he's not there. Maybe what that did was it gave my grief somewhere to go for a second. And maybe that's what you need rather than suppressing it. And, you know, Nepal they have a festival called Gai Jatra, which means cow festival. So what they do is they will actually have a procession of everyone who's lost someone that year. And they dance in the streets, and it's just so overtly joyful. And that had a profound effect on me, because one of the big lies grief tells you is that you are alone in this and no one has ever felt this way before. It's sort of impossible. You fit that sort of drowning loneliness that comes with it is such a lie. And the visual effect of looking out over an entire city of people who have been through this year, it kind of explodes that lie for you. You go, oh wow, that was just a feeling, that wasn't real. So that had a profound effect on me. And you know, Sicily, that's called the Festa dei Morti. So children wake up in the morning. It's kind of like Christmas morning, and they've got a load of presents. Except the presents are hidden around the house, so it's a treasure hunt, and they've been left there not by Santa but by their dead relatives. And that was amazing, hearing about that and sort of talking to people about that, because it really threw into sharp relief for me how different my upbringing was in Britain, where when you mention a dead person, everyone has to go quiet and look at the floor and say, very sad. And I most certainly did not associate them with a sugar rush and a treasure hunt. I was really jealous. You know, that was this, and you know, in Thailand, that was actually a Chinese death festival. I celebrated it in Thailand because my father lives there and his wife is half Chinese. And that was interesting. That had an effect because it was the only one I actually celebrated with family. And so that kind of felt really different. And Japan had a really astonishing effect on me, partly because I didn't think it was going to. In Japan, much like Mexico, the idea is that the spirits come back to visit, and they're just sort of around. And they have a sort of ceremony at the end to send the spirits on their way, which I love, because I just love the idea that they just, okay, you can go now. It's the only festival I found that emphasizes them. All right, off you go.
Oh, yeah, off you go now. We're done with you.
That's enough. We don't have space for you. But it was beautiful because it was in Kyoto, and they have these beautiful mountains surrounding the city on almost all sides, and they light bonfires in the shape of these huge Chinese characters, and the bonfires are lit by kindling on which people have written their wishes. So in a lot of Asia, there's this idea that if you burn something, it goes to heaven. And so people have written their wishes, and they're just sending them off on this amazing sort of divine postal system. This is how it gets to heaven. And I just thought this would be pretty. I did not expect to have such an emotional reaction to it. I really felt like I was saying goodbye again. And that, I realized, is how you should be dealing with grief. It doesn't heal like a wound, you know, like it gets better every day. It comes in waves, and there is a part of your brain that will never understand that person is gone. There's a part of your brain, it doesn't speak English. You don't get to explain it. So you just have to say goodbye again and again and again. And I feel like this is something that they've worked out that we haven't worked out here. And so when these fires lit, and I just realized, oh my gosh, nobody knows me here. I can totally let down my repressed British barrier and just have a cry right now. I did. And it was, and I think with this one, I was so focused on the last 2 death festivals that were literally coming in a few days after Japan was these corpse ones. You know, I was really not expecting it to have such a profound emotional effect. And of course, and Madagascar was so, you know, everything there is so completely different. And this is a place where people go into the family tombs and they take the dead bodies out and they give them a new shroud, and then they put them on their shoulders and dance around with them. And I was fascinated to see, first of all, the grief that people burst into tears when they saw them again. Because again, my sort of Western brain went, sorry, didn't he die like 14 years ago? This isn't news. And then I go, oh, of course, it comes in waves. Exactly the same thing. And I knew this 10 minutes ago in Japan, and suddenly I've forgotten again. But, you know, there, and of course, that something funny happened to me there, which is that people started lifting the bodies onto their shoulders and dancing around with them to this unbelievably upbeat, joyful trumpet music. And I felt a knock in the back of my head, and someone had hit me with a corpse. And I thought, wow.
Oh my God.
I thought, wow, I started this journey so terrified of death, and I was stalking people online, and I just got hit in the head by a corpse, and it's fine. You know? Of course I got hit in the head by a corpse. At some point that was inevitable, you know. And the last one, you know, was in Indonesia, in a place called Tanah Toraja, where again they exhume the corpses, but this is even more stark because they're not wrapped in a shroud. You can see their faces. They give them brand new clothes. They carry them out. You get people there. I mean, it's funny. I posted a little video of it, and straight away someone's like, "Did you have permission to take a video of such an intimate moment?" I was like, "Oh, honey, I know you think it's intimate. It is not. There were so many people. Everyone was taking photos, not just tourists, family members. The first thing that happened was a woman ran up to this woman who'd been dead for about 4 years. She shoved her phone in the face of this corpse, and she's FaceTiming her mum. And her mum is so excited to see her grandmother again. She was probably like, oh my goodness, there she is. Hi, grandma. It was astonishing. And the other thing that was so amazing about that is that obviously I'd been so traumatized by the corpse of my father-in-law. And I'm not saying I shouldn't have been. He was bloated and green. It was horrifying. But it made me realize that the horror of a corpse it's partly cultural. It really is. And it isn't instinctive necessarily. And what I found amazing was that being around all these dead people became normal within about 5 minutes. I cannot even tell you how ordinary it felt after a few minutes. And I posted a video that has been shared so many times. And I posted it with such trepidation. This woman standing next to her grandmother, who's been dead for 4 years, and her grandfather, who's been dead for 7. And she's just sort of sitting, looking at the view. And then she looks at her grandmother and she sees something on her hair, like a bit of dust or something. And she just brushes it away. And it was so nonchalant, and it was so casual and so loving. And I remember that moment and thinking, I think that moment just changed my life. Just this tiny, and I shared it wondering how people would react, and I was amazed at the positive comments. People saying, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. I wish I could see my grandmother again. And it just, I don't know, I am forever changed, and I hope this comes across in the book. In fact, that chapter in which I described that incident was one of the only chapters where I had no edits at all. My editor was like, leave it exactly as it is. So I'm hoping that's come across. Sorry, you asked which one had the most profound effect on me, and my answer is apparently all of them.
I know. I'm so glad you went through all of them, because I think that's my biggest interest right now is the different cultures and how they perceive and deal with death. And you just went through this list, and I'm just, I love it. I love hearing about it. Because it's like, so, I don't know, like, I don't like the whispery, quiet, I've described in a couple other episodes that I feel like death is a room in the house that no one's allowed to go in, sort of thing,
Right.
society wise. And whispery, go in, whispery, come out. And then we're supposed to expect everyone to know what to say to someone when they've lost someone, or kids,
Exactly.
or, so I love hearing about the cultures where it seems more true to our roots as human beings that we would have a dead body amongst us, that we would try to figure out ways to send them off or say goodbye, and we do it collectively. That seems more natural and normal. And I think we've
Yeah.
gotten really far off the path here. So hearing about this is, some of it like scares me, like just the thought of seeing the dead body. I don't think I'd want to see my loved ones like years after they died, but maybe I
Yeah,
would.
I think you would. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's shocking at first. I mean, don't get me wrong. They are embalmed, but they look just very, very dried out. So they're not complete. I mean, don't get me wrong. The embalming doesn't always take, and so some of them are skeletons. But this is the thing. It's about. I think the thing that ties together all of the different festivals for the dead that I've seen is this idea that you have to have a continuing relationship with the dead once they're gone, for that part of you, that because where does the love go? It goes nowhere. There's nothing. You just have to carry it round. And all of these rituals and festivals, they seem to give somewhere for the love to go. So of course, right now you think of someone you love and you think, well, I don't want to see you dead. But part of that is because you've been told that being dead is bad, that when someone is dead, you go, poor dead person, because they're dead. Well, not really. I mean, maybe if they died in an awful way, of course, poor them for that moment. But there's nothing wrong with being dead. It's okay. But also it's this idea that, for us, when somebody dies, they essentially freeze in time. And this has been exacerbated a little bit by things like, open casket funerals with, embalming and stuff. This strange practice where people want to kind of freeze them like Sleeping Beauty, because decay is so terrible. Well, you know what? No, it isn't. It's not terrible. Neither is aging. Neither is natural change of any kind. But we have been given this message that being dead is a bad thing. So I think what they might say in Indonesia about they don't say, they're not picking up these dead bodies the way you and I would pick up a computer. They say, Grandma, we're going to move you now. We're just going to put you over there like we did last year, okay? Because it would be extremely rude not to. And it's not. And I mean, don't forget, the reason they do this is the ancestors are God there. When you pray for health or good grades or money or whatever, you're not praying to God, you're praying to your ancestors. Same in Madagascar. They are the go-between between you and God. So the reason they do this for them is because they don't want to annoy them. You've got to keep them sweet if they're the ones who are responsible for your your fortune and your mishaps.
Right.
So they're very, very respectful to these bodies. But I think what they would say about you not wanting to, the idea that you don't want to see someone dead, is, but they're still here, they're around, this is just what they look like now. It's just, there's no special status given to being alive. Because the thing is, here's really what it comes down to. In the West, death means a loss of your power. Once you're dead, you can't do things. The number of people who've said that to me, all American, they go, you can't do things when you're dead. So that has its root in a couple of things. First of all, let's be honest, capitalism, which is a system that kind of values you on your output. If you're dead, you're not doing anything. So you're no use. So you don't matter anymore, essentially. In Indonesia and Madagascar, when you die, you become a demigod. You matter so much more now. You are so much more important than you were the other day when you were alive. So there's so many reasons that they're not going to be, horrified and upset by someone being a corpse. They're certainly not going to say, poor grandma. Like, poor grandma? What are you talking about? She's calling the shots now. She is now in charge of whether or not we get crops this year, So, it's got its root in so many things. So at first you might see it and feel shocked and horrified, but it really does just come down to the stories that we're told and have been told for years and years. And it's really hard to take off a cultural lens and realize that so much of what you think and feel about these things is 100% down to that.
And one of the, I also went to therapy after Derek and my brother Michael died. And I really did not like grief therapy at all. It feels extremely, for the most part, I had to go through like 2 different therapists to find the one that was the right fit. So I do want to say to anyone listening to this, you do not have to be with if you see someone and you're not really connecting with them, or they're saying things that don't feel like they're really moving you forward, it's okay for you to switch and try to find someone else, because that happened to me. And I just felt like the person I was talking to was it just wasn't the right vibe. It wasn't the right fit for me. And so anyways, one of the things that one of the therapists said to me that stuck with me, and you just mentioned that, is that she said, just because they died doesn't mean your relationship has to die. You can continue to have a relationship with them. That was the number one and only thing I remember from that whole time. And from then on, I would always go hiking with Derek. And so I would start to get out of the house again, and I would start to go hiking, and I would imagine him hiking with me. And I even said, like, even if this is just my imagination, I don't care. It's helping me move forward. So I would talk to him, and I would just continue going. So yeah, I think that's really important.
That's great. And I think people, for some reason, think that isn't healthy. I mean, don't get me wrong. If he talks back, that's not healthy. But he, talking, it's fine. It's and it is the message I've been getting every single time. And I'm not sure how much I've taken on board, to be honest, because, I haven't built a Day of the Dead shrine. There's a lot I haven't done. I think I'm just thinking of it differently. And things like not talking about the person in that hushed voice, I found extremely helpful. Like, I will just bring up something hilarious my father-in-law said, and I won't do it like, do you remember that time? I just mention it the way I mention everybody else, because I don't want to confer the fact, I don't want to imbue the fact that he's dead with any kind of significance, because you know what? And this is another thing I've learned. It's an extremely ordinary thing that's happened. No one told me that. Absolutely no one ever mentioned to me that death is normal.
Right.
It's always a terrible thing. Like some sneaky lawyer hid the small print, in the contract. And it's like, no, we knew this. You don't it's not terrible every time. It's terrible. You feel terrible. But it's this idea that an aberration has happened every time. And even if someone dies young, that is also normal. It's not as common, because aging is the worst thing you can do to your body. And that's basically what we're very privileged in the West, that most of our death is age related. That is, do you know how lucky we are to be dying of just our bodies going, oh, I think I've had enough now, rather than being murdered, rather than some sort of terrible disease. And I mean, we're saying this amid this global pandemic of coronavirus. This is a terrifying time, and it's partly because we all thought we were going to die of aging, and now they're saying maybe not. So we've got to remember that that's a privilege, and we may as well be grateful for it, rather than still being shocked when someone dies. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean you have to be. I've spoken to a few people who are very, very intensely in death denial, and they're very angry at the death positive movement, because they think death positive means like cheering when people flatline, and it's like, no, it's not saying it. You should feel positive. It means, it's just like sex positive. It's like, accept that it's a thing that goes to happen, and your life, you can live your life with a lot less anxiety, and hopefully make your life a little bit richer, because denying death it's time consuming, and it's energy intensive, and it's useless. That's another thing. Don't set yourself up for failure, mate. Come on, there's enough failure in life.
It is so useless, because, I mean, even if you have no beliefs at all, nothing, bottom of the barrel, you're just practical person, it still is nice to have a positive feeling about the person. Because if we're all going to die, and you want to have the feeling about that person when they die negative, that doesn't do their life justice. Right. I feel like you should be able to say the jokes that your father-in-law said. You should be able to tell a funny story, or a memorable, meaningful one, or, whatever. I just think it's weird to just be like, okay, let's just never talk about that or that person or anything that they brought into our lives at all.
Well, yeah, particularly as the way that we as humans deal with the fact we're going to die is that we try and imbue our lives with value. We have opinions, and we have expertise, and some of us actually make other people, like, you spend your life building value. And I remember thinking this when a family member died, and everyone just said, very sad. I was like, are you serious? They spent their whole life doing stuff that would hopefully get them talked about. And instead, the only thing anyone's focusing on is their absence. And
Right.
I don't mean to be rude, but you are demoting them to the same level as every other. Did you know that everyone is dead almost? Almost everyone who's ever been alive is dead. Every animal, every tree, every plant, every single cell amoeba, almost all of them are dead. So if when I die, the only thing anyone wants to talk about is the fact that I'm absent, I'm sorry, I feel demoted. I feel like you have just demoted me to the level of literally almost everything that's ever been alive, and I don't appreciate it.
Exactly. And so if there is life after death, I will come and haunt you. No, I'm just kidding.
well, yeah, it'll be hilarious.
So I'd like to go back really fast and just sort of figure out, what was your upbringing like? So both your parents were doctors. Did you have siblings? And what was death like growing up for you? Were you afraid of it before all this happened to you, or what were your views on death?
Oh yeah, I was terrified. So yes, my mother was a nurse, and she's still alive, but she's not a nurse anymore. She's retired. And my stepfather's a GP, a doctor. And so I was very terrified of it. And I think it's my mum said to me when I started writing this book about how much she doesn't like talking about it. She says the thing is, in our industry, death is a failure. And yeah, I think there was just a lot of anxiety around it, definitely. And don't forget that all of the films that we watched as children, all of the stories are essentially, the bad guy is pretty much just death. And they just give it a scary face, and then the hero tricks it or kills it or kicks it away or whatever. And that's the conclusion of every single story. And so you get the idea as a child that death is a punishment for bad people, because that's who dies. Oh, and also once they die, everything bad they ever did gets undone. So this is why they find that children between the ages of 5 and 9 tend to view death as something that you can get out of if you're smart enough or if you're special enough. I mean, think about the first big story we're told. Someone gives you a chocolate egg because it's Easter, and some well-meaning adult says it's not all about stuffing your face. We're celebrating Jesus rising from the dead. There it is. With a sugar hit, you can avoid death if you are special enough. And that is what every story is. I mean, look at Harry Potter. The villain in that is called Voldemort. That is French. Vol de mort. Flee from death. It is just everywhere, this idea. So yeah, I definitely grew up with this idea that it was the very, very worst thing that can happen. So yes, it was. I was definitely anxious about it, and I turned into an anxious adult. I think definitely with the part of my whole anxiety thing when I was stalking everybody was I became obsessively afraid of food. And what I was doing was, I know some people who sort of go raw, or they eschew everything that is in a packet. I went the other way, and I actually was obsessively, constantly reading nutrition labels, always just looking up how much sugar a day men, how much fat a day men. It was my husband I was worried about, not me. And I guess you could see that as bargaining, because I'm there bargaining with the food industry, begging them not to kill us. So that kind of anxiety, I definitely carried it into adulthood, and I've got rid of it now. I think I've got rid of it. Well, you know what? Just to prove I have, after this interview, I think I'm going to go and order ice cream delivery just to just cool. But yeah, it's so that was my upbringing. But really, I think I think we all had the same upbringing in many ways, because I think one of the main things that brings you up is it's not your parents, it's your stories. It's the stories you're told. And we were all exposed to the same stories. And those stories all had the same trajectory and the same message, which was this idea that that death is something that you can avoid, unless you're Bambi's mum. Disney had it in for Bambi's mum. I felt very betrayed by that. I guess they needed to put Bambi in the kind of peril that would make him grow as a deer. But so death was either something that happened as a punishment for bad people, or it happened to a good person, and that good person must be avenged, or that is, that becomes the life-changing terrible thing that the character has to then overcome, so I weirdly feel like we all in a way had the same upbringing in the West.
What about religion? Were you ever exposed to it? Friends who are religious, and what were your thoughts on that?
So when I was very young, I went to a school that had nuns everywhere. I remember this quite clearly, but my mum, she never really entertained thoughts of it. She certainly didn't tell me to believe in God. She also never said don't. She never said it's a load of rubbish. She said her theory was that it was, you should educate and not indoctrinate, and then you can decide for yourself when you're old enough to ponder such huge questions. I don't think she wanted to sort of push these ideas into my head when it was still soft and impressionable. She wanted me to make my own mind up. But what seems to be the result of education without indoctrination is usually atheism or agnosticism, a form of that. So I remember those stories, but I just, I never had like a big reveal where I sort of suddenly decided I was an atheist. I think it's one of those things where when someone asks, in my house, there was a lot of philosophical talk going on. So what do you think is a different question from what do you believe? So when someone said, do you think there's a God? My answer would usually be that I was agnostic. I don't know and neither do you was usually my answer. But if someone asks, what do you believe? I think that's a different process. I think that is where you have to sort of reach into your chest and have a rummage around and just pull out what you find. And every time I've been asked the question, do you think there's a God? What I have pulled out of my chest is, no, I do not. I don't think, I really do think it's all chaos. And that doesn't even horrify me anymore. It just seems to be, it's just true to me. Like I can't believe that 2 and 2 make 5. They just don't. But I also understand why people believe, and I'm kind of jealous, to be honest. I think it would be lovely to think that someone loves me and is looking out for me, but I don't. So that's probably why I got sent into such a deep end when I had my year of terrible death anxiety. Probably would have helped a lot to believe.
Right. Well, and also I think that, like, especially with what's going on with the coronavirus right now, I was just telling a friend yesterday that all my germaphobe friends, they feel all vindicated now, but some of them that are really extremely germophobic, they're just so stressed out all the time. And I feel like they're right. No one's saying they're wrong. Like, they're right. There's a lot of germs and everything, but you have to draw the line somewhere and you have to just trust just to get through life. Like, I'm not saying licking toilet seats like I just saw on the news. Some stupid person on TikTok did that in an airplane or I don't know what. So anyways, but I'm not saying all that, but
you won't get coronavirus that way. It's not how it's passed. So you're just being gross, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. And then they're just trying to be shocky and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
And I do think that, you have to take care of yourself and be sensible and all that. But we are drawing the line at some point, because if you actually think about all the stuff that's real and that's going on in the world and in the physical world, to our bodies and our environment, to shared environments. Like I was talking to my dad the other day and I said, well, at this one, he's asking me how it is in California. My dad's in Arizona. And I said, well, I know that some of the stores ask you to bring your own pen. And if you're going to sign for the credit card. And he said, oh yeah, Sandy, his girlfriend, he's like, she never brings she always brings her own pen. His pens are disgusting. And I never even thought of that. I never thought of that.
I'm one of those people that feels vindicated in a way, just because I've been sanitizing, washing my hands, trying not to touch my face for years. And that's because I live in London, which has loads of people who have to go to work even though they have a cold. And I don't want a cold. So, I have a friend who is, she has extreme anxiety anyway. So this has been a challenge. And, she's way, way over-informed is the thing, because this is what a lot of people, when they have death anxiety, do. They try to inform themselves and find something comforting. But of course, anxiety won't let you find anything comforting, because they go, yeah, but what anxiety sort of says to you, but what if that's not true? But what if something else happens? And, so with her, I think what you have to focus on is what you can do. What is the advice? The advice is wash your hands, don't touch your face, social distance. And then my friend comes back with a whole thing like, oh my God, young people are dying now. And I'm like, okay, what's the advice? Oh, is it the same? It's the same, right? So just
yeah, right.
Yeah, but I'm finding it fascinating to see how different people are reacting to this unfathomable death reminder that we're all having, because I think it's really difficult for, what I'm finding interesting is how much difficult it is for older people. A lot of my friends have been tweeting, lock up your boomers, because they just refuse to take it seriously, which,
oh my God, they're so hard to keep in. They're just so active, and they're like, I'm fine. I'm like, well, you
they
stop.
locked us up when we were kids. They were worried about rapists and things, and now we have to lock them up. My goodness, you know, but but I get it. You know, I'm sympathetic, because we're all dealing with it, with this big sort of death reminder, this reminder of our own mortality, because there's a death plague going around. But older people are going to be worse affected. And why is that? It's because they're closer to death anyway. So they have a whole extra layer of death reminder with this, in which they're told that they are vulnerable, that death is closer for them than it is for us. And a lot of them are reacting with just flat out denial. And it's very frustrating. You know, I know someone whose parents are still saying it's a conspiracy. Really? At this point, just wash your hands and stay inside. You know, it's very frustrating, but I do understand why this denial is happening. And I'm trying to be sympathetic, because the fact is they're reacting like this because they have more to deal with than we do. They've got more of a death reminder going on, because they're being reminded of their ordinary mortality. So, you know, I'm sympathetic. I want to shake them and just say, stay in your house and wash your hands. I'm very annoyed by it, but I do also, I feel like I understand where it's coming from. So, you know, I do feel bad for them. But again, the advice is the same for everybody, regardless. So that's just what I keep trying to remind people of. But yes, you will see, you know, people reacting in these various fascinating ways to the fact that they're all now always thinking about possibly dying, and it's going to go on for a year and a half, I think. So I think it could change the whole psychological makeup of society, genuinely.
And it doesn't help that our president says such incredibly ignorant things constantly. So, okay. So in closing, I just want to know, well, there's two closings. This is the pre-closing. I would like to know a little bit about Chris. What was he like?
He was, so he was Australian, and very sort of extremely expressive. So when he was telling a story, he would sort of wave his arms around and really labor the point. So for example, I remember so clearly once he got off a train and he came home all angry, right, with some encounter he'd had. And I didn't listen to the rest of the story because I was laughing so much at the way he described this guy. He said, so then who gets on the train but this huge guy? I was like, I've never heard more effort put into two syllables for something because the man was large, you know. And yeah, it was just, he was very funny. He would leave, when he went away and we had to look after the dogs, he would leave notes, what to feed them, what to do, you know, and they were just hilariously written, and he has no idea how funny he is. So for example, one of the things he said was, if Troy walks past a bitch in heat, he will go for her and will not be dissuaded. And it was so funny. I just used to love reading these out in his voice. So yeah, he was great. And his wife died in 2008 on Christmas morning, and he had retired to look after her. This was my husband's mother. And you know, he was there rattling around in this house that he bought for his whole family, and he was talking about getting someone to move in, to, you know, a lodger. And Dion found this really sad, and so kind of suggested that he would be the lodger, kind of I think he didn't want to admit that he wanted to look after him, that he found it too sad that he'd be living with a stranger. And so they moved in, and then after that they really wanted me to move in as well. And it was amazing how they made this little pitch, conveniently leaving out the terms annoying each other and civilizing influence. But it was so, I'd never been welcomed like that by, the parent of a boyfriend. And he used to do things for me that they were amazing little gestures, but they meant so much. So one time on the day we found him dead, I was thinking about when we've been to France. The three of us had driven to France and had a holiday. And there was this wine that I'd liked. And later, sort of 2 weeks before he died, we'd had dinner and he brought out this wine and he showed it to me. And I was like, okay, wine. And he went, this is the wine we had in France and you really liked it. And I didn't have the heart to tell him. I didn't remember, because he has this policy that my glass must always be full. So I didn't remember this because I'm in love with it, right? And then on that day, I was on his computer and I was just trying to find out information, trying to work out when he died. And Dion came up from the basement and he was holding an entire case of this wine that I liked.
Aww.
And I know it was for me and not for him, because it was white wine and he didn't like white wine. He only drank it. And it was just, it was so...
Dion is just to clarify, Dion is your boyfriend.
Yeah, sorry, yes.
Yeah, Chris's son, okay.
Yeah, and it was just unbelievable. I just remember turning and looking and he was holding an entire case of this wine. And I thought he didn't even go for the brownie points with that. He didn't even mention he bought an entire case of it. And it was just for me. And it was just, it was things like that. It was always like really sweet things like that, he took us, he took us to the opera once and we saw La Traviata and I really loved it. And then later he was booking to go to the opera again, and he booked La Traviata again because I'd enjoyed it so much.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Honestly, such a sweetheart. Yeah, such a sweet, but it's sort of a very gruff sweetheart. He was wrong most of the time. So we always had these big debates, and of course nobody knew this, because you don't necessarily mention it, do you? You don't necessarily go around describing people in this way until they die. Mm-hmm. But maybe we should take more time to talk about, I know this brilliant person. Sit down, let me tell you. Because otherwise it only comes out when they're dead. And it's always cliches, like they lit up a room. They were the light of the party. And it's like, we've only got like 4 platitudes, why can't we just say, oh my God, he bought an entire case of this wine that I liked and we took it home.
Yeah, it's funny with Derek. In the beginning, I was just like, go hiking and I'd have all these positive, I'd have a positive relationship with him. Is after he died. But he was actually my first serious boyfriend. So, and when we broke up, I was so pissed about the breakup, and he was too, because he thought he was right. But anyways, a couple of years after he died, and after I'd had this relationship with him in my mind, all of a sudden I was in the shower one day and I just got so pissed at him. And it's like all my anger about everything came out. I'm like, you're such a jerk. And why are you so small-minded? And blah, blah, blah. I just went off on it. And it felt so good because I'm like, okay, now this is a realistic relationship finally.
Yes. Well, yeah, this is the problem. Jim Morrison said that death makes angels of us all and gives us wings where we had shoulders smooth as raven's claws. And it's true, but but why do we do that? Why do we elevate people like that after they die? And I think it's fear. And I think it's because we all have this sense that death is a demotion in some way, because like I said, in the West, when you die, you lose all your power. And so, you don't speak ill of the dead. And it's because you shouldn't kick people while they're down. And in our culture, we were taught that when people die, that means they're down, 6 feet down. Mm-hmm. And so you don't kick them. But it does lead to this strange thing when we start elevating people to a sort of angel level, and it's not true. And I think, if we had the choice, I think most of us would want to be remembered as we are, unless you sucked, in which case you might really you might really relish being talked about like you were just so awesome. But
it's like you need your own PR person post-death. Like you hire them and you're like, listen, I wasn't a very good person when I was alive, so I'm going to need you to put some spin on some of my things.
Yeah, but you know what? That's what people do anyway. So, that's absolutely what happens. Suddenly it was, I would love to read a story where someone an obituary where someone's like, he was meh, he was fine. I guess we missed a bit.
Yeah. He was just sort of boring, we didn't really know him that well. And yeah.
He was beige. He was just a beige person, just a bog standard old woman, You don't
hear about that. Well, I'm really glad you told us about Chris, because he sounds like a really cool person. He sounds like someone not perfect, but someone that I would have loved to have been friends with. I love it. I love the notes. I love the dog. I love the wine. He sounded thoughtful and kind and funny. And that's like my type of person. So I'm glad you talked about him.
Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Yes. So now I would like to know how the listener can find you and your book, and like, how can they just stay connected to your journey before your book comes out in February?
Well, the book it's actually already taking pre-orders on from my publisher. It's unbound.com. And so if you just go to Unbound and you type in either my name, Erica Buist, or the title of the book is This Party's Dead. And I'm on Twitter. I've got my own, I tweet as me, which is at Erica Buist, or at This Party's Dead in fact, is it This Party's Dead? I think it's at The Death Devils, but yeah, you'll find me on Twitter. I'm there. And they also both have Instagram accounts. If you go to This Party's Dead on Instagram, you can see all of my journeys and all of the amazing videos from the death festivals. And if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see a lot of my dog, and he's very cute. So, up to you. But yes, say hi on Twitter. I'm very approachable, I like to think.
Yes. And I'll have all these links in the show notes on the Death Talk podcast website. I'm not sure what episode number this is, but look up Erica Buist and you will find all of these links just in case you didn't get them, and you'll be able to connect with Erica. And Erica, thank you so much for talking with me today. And I wish you the best of luck with your book. It sounds completely fascinating. I cannot wait to hear about these death festivals in all the different countries. They just sound so amazing and interesting.
That's lovely. Thank you so much. It's been lovely chatting to you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much for listening. All the links and anything that I mentioned in today's episode will be available on deathtalkpodcast.com in the show notes. Thank you so much.